It is the autumn of 1940, and Britain is terrified. The beaches have been ringed with barbed wire. Church bells stand silent, reserved as the signal for invasion. On the south coast, farmers watch the channel with a peculiar mixture of dread and defiance, scanning horizons that have, for centuries, delivered everything from trade to plague to conquest. And somewhere in that cold grey water, or already walking among ordinary men and women on ordinary streets, are the agents of Nazi Germany. They arrive by parachute in the dark. They arrive in inflatable dinghies dragged ashore by the tide. They arrive with forged papers, practiced accents, and memorized cover stories. They are the Abwehr's best hope of destabilizing a nation that has refused, against all military logic, to accept defeat. Each agent carries documentation designed to make them invisible: ration books, travel permits, and, crucially, the newly introduced National Registration Identity Card, a small, folded document that every man, woman, and child in Britain is now legally required to carry. The Germans have gone to considerable trouble to copy it. The forgeries are remarkably good, printed on appropriate paper stock, bearing the right stamps and serial numbers, filled in with careful handwriting that mimics the bureaucratic style of local registration offices. By any visual inspection, they are convincing. By the standard of most intelligence operations of the era, they should have been sufficient. They are not sufficient. Not because British security officers have some miraculous ability to detect forgeries. Not because the ink is wrong, or the paper too thick, or the photograph improperly fixed. The documents fail for a reason so fundamental, so gloriously mundane, that it reads more like a comedy of errors than a chapter in the history of espionage. The date is wrong, not slightly wrong, not wrong in some subtle way that requires expert analysis to detect, wrong in a way that immediately, obviously, and categorically marks every single card as a counterfeit, and every single holder as a spy. To understand why, you have to understand what Britain was trying to build in those desperate months, and why a small administrative decision made in the basement offices of the General Register Office would turn out to be one of the most effective counterintelligence tools of the entire war. The National Registration Act had been passed on September 5, 1939, just 2 days after war was declared. The logic was straightforward enough. In a nation at war, the government needed to know precisely who its citizens were, where they lived, and what skills they possessed. Food rationing would require it. Conscription would demand it. The management of a wartime economy, moving workers to munitions factories, tracking evacuees, allocating resources, made some form of universal identity documentation not merely useful, but essential. By October 1939, every household in Britain had been visited by a local enumerator. Residents provided their names, addresses, occupations, and dates of birth. In return, each adult received a national registration identity card. Children were listed on a family card held by the head of household. The entire exercise was conducted with the quiet efficiency that characterized British administrative ambition when it was genuinely motivated, and the result was a register of approximately 41 million people. What the system was not originally designed to do was catch spies. That was a side effect, and a rather accidental one, born from the intersection of bureaucratic practicality and the particular nature of forgery. The problem for German intelligence was this: the identity card was not a static document. It evolved. The original cards issued in 1939 were followed by revised versions in 1940 and 1941 as the registration system was updated, expanded, and corrected. Each version had slightly different formatting. different serial number structures, different registration district codes. A forger working in Hamburg from a sample obtained in 1939 was producing a document that might already be outdated by the time the agent deploying it reached Britain. But the deeper problem, the fatal problem, was the date format. In Britain, dates are written in a specific and consistent order: day, then month, then year. The 5th of October 1940 is written as 5.10.40 or 5/10/40, or occasionally 5-X-40. This is so fundamental to British daily life that it requires no conscious thought. A clerk filling in a registration card writes the date of issue the way they write every date: day 1st, month 2nd, year 3rd. It is habit, instinct, reflex. In Germany, the convention is different. Germans also place the day before the month, so on that particular point, no error occurs. The catastrophic difference lies in a smaller detail: how months are rendered when abbreviations or numerical shortcuts are used, and crucially, the specific formatting conventions applied to official documents of different types. German administrative documents of the period had their own rhythms, their own typographic habits, their own small tells. When German forgers, working from samples, working under time pressure, working in a country where the visual grammar of officialdom was slightly different, produced British identity cards, they imported those habits, unconsciously, inevitably. The result was dates that looked to a trained British eye subtly but unmistakably foreign. The spacing was wrong. The punctuation was wrong. The way day and month related to one another on the page was wrong in ways that any registration officer, any policeman, any ARP warden who had seen 1,000 genuine cards could sense immediately, even if they could not always articulate precisely what was off. MI5's records from the period, many of which have since been declassified, reveal a pattern that is almost comedic in its consistency. Agent after agent, arriving in Britain through various clandestine routes, was apprehended within hours or days of arrival. The reasons varied on the surface. One was caught at a roadblock, another at a railway station, a third whilst attempting to purchase a meal without proper documentation. But the underlying cause was frequently the same. The identity card did not look right. If you are finding this interesting, a quick subscribe helps more than you know. Consider the case of the 4 agents who arrived by dinghy on the Kentish coast in September 1940. They had been trained by the Abwehr for months. They spoke passable English, carried plausible cover stories, and were equipped with everything the German intelligence service believed would allow them to operate undetected. They were arrested within days. Their identity cards were examined by officers who flagged them almost immediately. The dating convention, small, subtle, but wrong, was among several anomalies noted in the subsequent analysis. The Germans were not unaware that their forgeries were failing. What they found maddening, according to post-war interrogations of Abwehr officers, was that they could not always identify why. They would correct one error only to have the next batch of agents arrested for something equally minor. The British registration system had accumulated through years of genuine use by genuine people, a kind of organic texture that could not be replicated by working from samples alone. Every legitimate card bore the marks of the specific clerk who had issued it, the specific office that had processed it, the specific moment in administrative history it represented. By contrast, the American Office of Strategic Services, forerunner to the CIA, had developed its own document forgery capabilities during this period, though with a somewhat different emphasis. The Americans entering the war later and with considerable resources invested heavily in acquiring genuine documents and reverse engineering them with extraordinary precision. Their forgery operation, known as the document section, eventually employed some of the finest commercial printers and graphic artists in the country and produced work of remarkable quality. The British approach, managed through what would become known as Station 9 at the Frythe in Hertfordshire, was arguably more pragmatic. It focused on understanding the texture of authenticity rather than merely replicating its surface appearance. British forgers did not just copy documents, they studied the administrative ecosystems that produced them, the human habits that surrounded them, the ways in which genuine documents aged and wore and accumulated the small marks of actual use. The Germans, for their part, had considerable forgery expertise concentrated within the SD and the Abwehr. Their technical capabilities were not significantly inferior to the Allies. The problem was epistemological. They could not know what they did not know. Working from samples obtained through espionage or from German-occupied territories, they lacked access to the continuous stream of genuine documents that would have allowed them to track the small evolutionary changes in British administrative practice. The impact of the identity card failures on German intelligence operations in Britain was, in practical terms, devastating. Of the approximately 115 agents the Abwehr sent to Britain during the war, the vast majority were captured almost immediately upon arrival. Some were turned, persuaded to work as double agents, feeding false information back to Germany, under the management of the double cross system run by M. Chaman 5. The XX system, as it was known internally, depended utterly on Germany believing its agents were still operational. The identity card problem contributed to this in a peculiarly elegant way. By removing agents from circulation so rapidly, it prevented the Germans from learning through operational feedback what their forgeries lacked. The agents who might have identified the specific errors, refined the technique, and returned with improved documentation were in British custody before they could communicate anything useful. The legacy of the identity card era stretches further than the war itself. The principle that document authenticity resides not merely in visual surface features, but in the organic accumulation of contextual detail. The administrative texture, the human habit, the specific grammar of officialdom, has shaped document security ever since. Modern identity documents are engineered precisely to be impossible to replicate without access to highly specific manufacturing processes, not because their visual appearance is particularly complex, but because the texture of their production is irreproducibly specific. The national registration system itself was abolished in 1952 after considerable political debate about civil liberties in peacetime. The identity cards were surrendered and destroyed. No national identity card scheme would return to Britain until the controversial ID card debates of the early 21st century, debates that have never been fully resolved and which continue to carry the faint ghost of that wartime tension between security and freedom. Surviving examples of wartime identity cards, both genuine and forged, can occasionally be found in the collections of the Imperial War Museum in London and the National Archives in Kew. The genuine ones are unremarkable, small, folded, slightly foxed with age. The forged ones look almost identical. Almost. Return, for a moment, to that autumn of 1940. The dinghy scraping against shingle in the dark, the carefully memorized cover story, the forged identity card folded into a coat pocket, produced with pride by handlers who believed they had thought of everything. And then the registration officer, or the policeman, or the ARP warden, taking the card and looking at it for a moment with that particular expression. Not alarm, not triumph, just a quiet, certain recognition that something here is not quite right. The date, just the date. It is day before month, month before year. A sequence so embedded in the British administrative habit that it has become invisible, which is precisely why it is so hard to counterfeit. Not because it is complex, not because it requires advanced technology, because it is so ordinary that no one thinks to explain it. The German agents had trained for months. They had learnt the geography of British towns they had never visited. They had practiced accents in language schools. They had memorized railway timetables and rationing rules and the names of English football clubs. They had done, in short, everything that intelligence services train their people to do. And they had been undone by the way a clerk in a registration office in Kent wrote the date on a small folded card. The most effective trap is the one that catches people who do not know they are walking into it. And sometimes, the most devastating weapon in a nation's armory is nothing more than the quiet, accumulated texture of a million ordinary habits. Britain did not beat the German spy network with brilliance alone. It beat it, in no small part, with paperwork,